Welcome into the latest edition of the OKPreps Kickoff Show. I'm your host, Michael Knight. It is week 2, and for a lot of matchups across the state of Oklahoma, it's rivalry week, as a lot of these games have a lot of implications on the line as far as bragging rights. You know, teams facing off in the top 10, top 5 in some classes. It's going to be a great week of football, great matchups all across the state of Oklahoma. I feel like I say this every week, but when we put out our top 10 games earlier this week, it was tough just narrowing it down to 10. This week especially, there's some great matchups that aren't in the top 10 that are going to be great football games on Friday night. So whatever matchup you end up seeing, you're probably going to be in store for some great football. As it is rivalry week, we have a lot of great matchups for week 2, and we kick things off as we do each and every single week with a look at the top 10 games. If you haven't done so already, you can check out OKPreps.com for a more in-depth breakdown on the top 10 games. We release that every single Monday, again, on OKPreps.com. Also, we should remind you that if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You just go to YouTube, search OKPreps, subscribe to our channel. You'll get all of our kickoff shows, all of our highlights as well, and throughout the 2019 season. And also for you listening to the podcast version of this show, that's right, if you can't watch, you can listen as well. Just search OKPreps Podcasts on Apple iTunes, and you'll be able to subscribe to our podcast channel. Not only will you get the kickoff show, but you'll also get our OKPreps Roundup, which recaps all the action, and that comes out every weekend on Sunday. But let's dive in right now with the top 10 games, the OKPreps 10 for week number 2, and we kick things off with the number 1 matchup, the game of the week, the game that I'll be at on Friday night. It's number 1 Broken Arrow taking on number 2 OWOSSO in 6A Division 1, as you get 1 versus 2. Anytime you get a matchup like this, no matter what week it is, you're going to be fired up for it, as Broken Arrow and OWOSSO come into the matchup 2-0 on the season. Broken Arrow beat the Rams twice last year. They were dominant in their regular season meeting, winning 47-20. But then they had a very close call against OWOSSO in the semifinals. They were able to pull it out and win 10-7 on their way to a perfect season and a state championship. But I was there for both matchups. Broken Arrow looked absolutely dominant in the regular season meeting back in 2018. Then they would play again in November with a spot in the state championship on the line, and OWOSSO looked great. And I've mentioned it before, not only on the website but on this program as well, how impressed I was with OWOSSO with the way they finished the season last year. They didn't have the best season coming off of a state championship. I think they'd be the first to admit that, but they were very young, they were very inexperienced, and now all of a sudden, by the time we got towards November last year, that inexperience had become experienced. And they definitely gave Broken Arrow all they wanted. It ended up being Broken Arrow's closest game of the season on their way to a state championship, and now they play again here in week 2, 1 versus 2. OWOSSO off to 2 big wins over Bentonville West and Fayetteville last week. Broken Arrow, they went down to Texas-dominated Mansfield High, and then last week go on the road to shut out Union in impressive fashion. We were there for that one. You can check out the highlights if you haven't done so already right now on OKPreps.com. So now this Broken Arrow OWOSSO matchup, it should also be mentioned that it is called the Patriot Bowl. It's sponsored by Folds of Honor, as these two teams meeting up once again in a rivalry clash. Now it has a little bit of a sponsorship feel to it. And of course, Folds of Honor is a great organization that does great work, not only in Oklahoma, but across the country. And so this is definitely a great matchup, but it also is going to be for a great cause when you talk about all the money that's going to be donated to Folds of Honor over this week leading up to kickoff on Friday night, and then a little bit afterwards during the game as well. Our number 2 matchup, we go down. We have a 6A2 and 5A squaring off, but it's still another rivalry clash, as 5A number 1 Carl Albert will play host to 6A2's number 4 Dell City. Both teams 1-0 on the season after kicking their season off last week. Dell City beat Bishop McGinnis, while Carl Albert shut out Midwest City. Carl Albert beat Dell City 32-31 in their matchup with Dell City a year ago. That game went to overtime, but Carl Albert would win after Dell City had some problems in the kicking game. That's really what it came down to. If Dell City didn't have any issues with their kicking game last year, they probably would have won that clash with Carl Albert. This is and by the way, that matchup was the first time that those two had played since the 2013 playoffs. And if you've been living under a rock, you might not know this, but a lot of high school football fans do know what Carl Albert is bringing to the table when they step on the field Friday night. They've won 37 consecutive games. They've had back-to-back perfect seasons. They're three-time defending 5A state champions, and another undefeated season for Carl Albert means 50 consecutive victories, and that would be a new state record for consecutive wins. Obviously, Dell City looking to not only end the winning streak for Carl Albert, but also they could also tarnish the unveiling, so to speak, of Carl Albert's quote-unquote new. It is a little bit renovated, and they've renamed it the Gary Rose Stadium. Obviously, longtime Carl Albert head coach who won many state championships with Carl Albert and really built the Titans into what they are today. They're renaming the stadium after Coach Rose, and Dell City, a hated rival of the Titans, would love nothing more than to go into Carl Albert and in that winning streak and put a little sour taste into the mouth of some of the Titans going into the rest of the season. Our number 3 matchup, we go to some small school football, a pair of number 2 teams, as 3A's number 2 Lincoln Christian will host 2A's number 2 Vian. Both of these teams played top 10 games last week as well, as Vian knocked off Eufaula. Lincoln Christian blew out Jones. Lincoln comes into this matchup 2-0. Vian coming in 1-0, having played just their season opener last week. Lincoln Christian beat Vian 21-13 in their matchup a year ago. The 21 points that Lincoln Christian scored in the matchup against Vian ended up being a season low for the Bulldogs, as even in their playoff matchup against Heritage Hall, they were able to score 34 points, even though they fell to the Chargers in that matchup. Their season low was 21 points, and that came against Vian. I know that there was bad weather. If you go back to this point in the season, there was bad weather all across Oklahoma. So a lot of these matchups, they had to deal with the rain. They had to deal with the weather wreaking havoc on the matchups this Friday night. And by the way, we'll get into it in our question portion of the show. But weather could potentially wreak havoc again this week, Thursday and Friday. Forecast calling for rain on both days. But Lincoln Christian has a great offense. Really impressed with what they were able to do last week against Jones. A really good football team as well. Offensively, defensively, they took them down. 49-14 was the final, and that one, Lincoln Christian, very impressive with what they were able to do on the road, knocking off Jones. But then you take on Vian. Vian has a stout defense. They have one of the best defenses in the state, regardless of class. Put that defensive unit going up against 4A, 5A, 6A teams, and they're going to be able to hold their own. They have legitimate guys. As we talk about, there's a difference between football players and then guys and dudes, and Vian has those guys that you need to be an elite defense. And so it's going to be a great matchup. What will happen when Vian, they're going to give up points because Lincoln's offense is too good. What happens with Vian's offense? Are they going to be able to keep up with Lincoln Christian? It's going to be a great matchup, and I'm looking forward to it. And we'll have highlights of that matchup on OKPreps.com, but stay tuned for more information on that. Our number 4 matchup is another top 3 matchup, and it features a 4A and 3A school, as 4A's number 1 Tuttle will take on 3A's number 3 Plainview. Plainview taking the week off last week after opening the season 2 weeks ago in week 0 down in Texas. They're 1-0 on the year. Tuttle is now 2-0 after beating Newcastle and Kingfisher in back-to-back weeks. Tuttle beat Plainview 34-19 in their matchup a year ago. These teams have alternated wins over the last 3 seasons. Tuttle, they dominated Kingfisher last week, and if you're Plainview and you need to figure out, what do we have to do to slow down Tuttle to try to get a victory on Friday night, number one is try to figure out how to limit what Tristan Truelove does offensively for the Tuttle Tigers. And we'll talk more about Tristan in our players to watch feature, but he had a phenomenal game against Kingfisher last week as Tuttle really had no problem dispatching the Yellow Jackets on the road. And now Kingfisher is down. It's not your typical Kingfisher team that's going to be contending for state championships. They're more than likely going to be a playoff team, but after that, who knows where they can fully go in Class 3A. But Plainview, that's a state championship contender right there. So you're going to have some heavy hitters on the field as Plainview travels to Tuttle to try to not only beat the Tigers, but end their winning streak. They've won 16 games in a row now, dating back to the beginning of last season. Our number 5 game, a very tradition-rich rivalry. It's the Bishop Battle, one of my favorite rivalries in Oklahoma. Bishop McGinnis will be hosting Bishop Kelly, the 2 Catholic schools out of Oklahoma City and Tulsa, respectively. McGinnis, number 3 in Class 5A, hosting number 2 Bishop Kelly. Both teams opened their season last week with losses to 6A2 teams, as Bishop Kelly, they opened the season last week with a loss to Booker T. Washington. Bishop McGinnis opened up the season with a loss to Dell City. Bishop McGinnis, they beat Kelly in the regular season 24-21 in overtime in the regular season to win the shillelagh, the stick that they fight for every single season. But Bishop Kelly got a bit of revenge as they met again in the 5A quarterfinals, with Kelly winning 34-33. And the reason why this matchup is one of my favorite in the state, not only do these teams not like each other, that's no secret. Look, when you have a rivalry, that's part of it. You don't like the other team. You don't like the other players. These guys genuinely do not like each other. It doesn't matter that they have however many miles in between them. They will come down the turnpike and want to put it on the other, as these two teams hate each other, but they also play classic games. I mean, when you look back at just the last 10 meetings alone, Bishop Kelly and Bishop McGinnis, the 7 of the last 10 meetings between these two were decided by a touchdown or less. And during that same stretch, we've had multiple overtime matchups between these two, including last year in the regular season, with Bishop McGinnis getting the overtime victory in Tulsa over Bishop Kelly. Now, Kelly, they're a little snake bit already by the injury bug. Will they be healthy enough to go on the road to take on McGinnis? Now, they have bigger fish to fry, and you might not want to rush some of those guys back just to beat McGinnis. I know that they're going to want to play. Those seniors are going to want to play, but it might be smarter to hold them out, make sure they're really ready to go by district play in a few weeks, because again, it all comes down to district play in 5A, getting a high seed and setting yourself up for success come playoff time in November. Our number 6 game, another tradition-rich rivalry game, and it's not often that you see this matchup this low in a top 10 list, but that's what you get, as number 4 Union will host number 3 Jenks. The reason why it's our number 6 game and not our number 1 or number 2 game this week, Jenks coming in 1-1, Union coming in 0-2 after being shut out last week to Broken Arrow, losing in week 0 to Mansfield Lake Ridge. Jenks shut out Mansfield Legacy in week 0, but then they were blown out last week. They're coming off their worst loss in decades after losing 57-7 to Bixby. Both teams kind of limping into this backyard bowl. It's not your traditional backyard bowl where it's 1 versus 2 or 1 versus 3 or whatever it may be, state championship implications. These two teams are still very, very good. And if you're a Jenks fan or a Union fan and your hand is on the panic button, don't hit it yet. It's week 2. There's a long season ahead of you. Jenks, I'm a little more worried about the Trojans. I think that they have some work to do. Obviously, they showed signs defensively of what they can be. And I know you're turning around and saying, well, what? They gave up 57 points the following week. They also turned the ball over 6 times. And so when your offense is turning the ball over that much, your defense is having to constantly be out there, you're going to give up points. Now, 57 points, that's a lot. I get it. But at the same time, this Jenks defense definitely has some things that I like. They have to figure out some things offensively to make up for that defense and to team up with that defense with what they bring to the table. Union, kind of the same situation where offensively I like the pieces that they have, but defensively they have to figure some things out. I like the fact that they only gave up 14 points last week to Broken Arrow, but offensively they struggled. They only managed a little over 100 yards in total offense. And coming into the matchup, I thought that offensively they were going to be able to have more success. So don't hit the panic button just yet. And regardless of what happens on Friday night in this matchup, don't write off either team as either team. And I had the question, we put out our rankings every Sunday. No matter what happens, the loser of this matchup is going to stay in the top 4. And the reason is until one of those West Side teams beat a Jenks or a Union, like a Norman or a Putnam City North, until one of them actually do it, they're not going to be ranked ahead because these are the heavy hitters. We know this. We have history behind it. And I know you don't necessarily base a season off of history, but when you have this much dominance, you kind of do. So until one of those West Side teams knock off a Jenks or a Union, and they'll have plenty of shots this year, we're going to keep those teams in the top 4 regardless of what happens on Friday. Our number 7 matchup, you got a 5A and 6A2 clash between two number 5 teams. As number 5 Claremore will host number 5 Sapulpa. Both teams opening up their season last week in style with a victory. Sapulpa knocking off Edison, Claremore knocking off Bartlesville. They both come in 1-0. Sapulpa beat Claremore last year 27-7. They used to be district foes back when Claremore was in Class 6A, but with them dropping down to 5A, now they play in non-district football. And these teams have some athletes. So I really like Claremore and I really like Sapulpa. They're kind of mirror images of one another, of what they want to be in their respective classes. For 6A2, you have a Sapulpa team that's chasing a Bixby and a Booker T. Washington, and they're wanting to become a championship contender. I think they have the guys to make a strong push this fall and not only make the playoffs, but potentially make it to the semifinals. And if some things fall their way, maybe even a little further. And the same can be said about Claremore. Claremore has had good season after good season, but when they get into the playoffs, they run into, most of the time, Carl Albert, and the Titans just kind of wipe the floor with them. This year, I think it might be a little different as the Zebras have the personnel. Now, a lot depends on Chayse Hightower. I know he's hurt and banged up. If he's able to come back and if he's healthy, this Claremore team is very good, and they have the potential to be a state semifinal team in Class 5A. Our number 8 game, we go back to 3A and 4A. Again, top 5 teams facing off. Number 1 Heritage Hall out of Class 3A will take on number 4 Clinton out of Class 4A. Both teams started their season last week, and they both got wins. Clinton with a blowout victory. Heritage Hall shut out Millwood in impressive fashion, 34-0. Heritage Hall beat Clinton last year 20-12, and they've now won 5 consecutive games against Clinton, and we're waiting for that moment. We're waiting for the moment. If you've been a fan of high school football in Oklahoma, not just for the last couple of years, but for 5, 10, 15 years now, like I have. I've been covering high school football in Oklahoma for almost a decade now. And at the beginning of my coverage of high school ball, Clinton was one of those teams that year in and year out, you just kind of penciled in not only to the top 5, but 3, 2, 1 as one of the best teams in Class 4A. They were consistently making it to the state championship game, and they were consistently winning a lot of those matchups. They've won 16 state championships, but we've been asking the question the last couple of years, when is Clinton going to get back to that dominating fashion that we saw just less than a decade ago? When are they going to get back to that? Heritage Hall, I saw them last week against Millwood. That defense looked outstanding. But offensively, they had some work to do. They were able to put up 34 points on the scoreboard, but defensively, that's where Heritage Hall made their money against Millwood last week. Clinton, they have a good offense. They're going to be able to put up points. I don't expect Heritage Hall to be able to pitch another shutout. This is going to be a great matchup. And I go back to that question, when is Clinton going to be back? Well, if you go on the road to Oklahoma City and knock off Heritage Hall, that would only be their 4th loss in the last 6 seasons. You're back. Big matchup in Oklahoma City between Heritage Hall and Clinton. Our number 9 matchup is a battle between Class A schools, as number 9, Crossings Christian, will take on number 6, Minco. Minco 2-0 on the season. Crossings Christian started 1-0. They go on the road last week to Rejoice, and they were housed in a blowout. Nate Anderson went wild for Rejoice, and Crossings Christians dropped to 1-1. Crossings did beat Minco last year 14-6 in overtime. It was their first win over Minco in their last 7 meetings against the Bulldogs all time. So Crossings getting their first win in school history against Minco in what was one of their best seasons in school history. Crossings can't afford another loss. They're in a tough district. Obviously, it's a long season. I still think that they're a playoff team, but if you want to be a semifinal, a championship contender team, you got to win games like this. And after what happened last week against Rejoice, you have to bounce back if you're Crossings. This is going to be a big test. I know Minco is hungry to get a little revenge after losing to Crossings in overtime a year ago. So you're going to have a determined Minco team coming to town looking for a little bit of revenge. You just got punched in the mouth by Rejoice. What happens, Crossings? Are you going to get up and fight, or what happens on Friday night? I think that Crossings is a good team. I think Minco is a good team. That's why they're both ranked in the top 10, and it's going to be a great clash on Friday night. Our final game in the top 10, another rivalry game, and we go down south for this one as 5A's number 10 Lawton MacArthur will take on 6A2's number 7 Lawton. And we mentioned Clinton. When is Clinton going to be back? Lawton Mac has had a couple of down years over the last couple of seasons. It appears that Mac is back, and the Highlanders off to a great start this year. They're 1-0 on the season. Lawton is also 1-0 on the year. Lawton beat Lawton Mac head-to-head 41-32. The Wolverines have been able to take advantage of Lawton Mac being a little down the last couple of years as they've gotten a couple wins against the Highlanders. But this is always a great rivalry game. And because Lawton Mac hasn't been your typical semifinal championship contender the last couple of years, they even missed the playoffs. This Lawton Mac rivalry hasn't had as much prestige and luster the last couple of years because of that. Now Lawton Mac looks like a serious team in Class 5A. What they were able to do last week definitely impressed me. That passing game they have is definitely one to watch. Lawton, obviously, for years and years and years, they want to run the football. You know what to expect with the Wolverines. This is going to be a great matchup for sure between two rivals that do not like each other down in Lawton. But we got enough. That's a look at our top 10 games. You've heard from me. You've heard my opinions. Now let's hear some opinions that actually matter. Let's hear from some of the coaches from around the state in these matchups. And we start with our number one game, Broken Arrow taking on OWOSSO 1 versus 2. And we talk with the head coach of the home team, the Broken Arrow Tigers, David Alexander, and he gives us his thoughts here on the matchup with the number 2 ranked Rams.
It's going to be a fantastic night in Broken Arrow. We'll have a packed stadium. We're going to raise a lot of money for the Folds of Honor. We appreciate the sponsorship for the Folds of Honor by the Jim Glover Family Auto Group. And with their sponsorship, we're going to be able to do so much and raise so much for the Folds of Honor. It's pretty cool. Both communities are real involved in that charity, and it's going to be a great night. As far as the football goes, of course, anytime you're playing a Bill Blankenship football team, they're going to come out. They're going to be prepared. They're going to have a great game plan. Last year, I think maybe early in the season, that we kind of burst on the scene a little bit and maybe surprised them. And what you really saw in the semifinals is what you're what you're going to always get from a Blankenship football team. Coach Klink had a great game plan, and I expect they'll have another great defensive game plan for us this year. And, Bill is, he's the offensive guy, man. He's always going to give you something new, something you've never seen before. And you better be prepared to defend the whole field, sideline to sideline, and the deep ball. So there's going to be a lot of fireworks on the football field as well as all the stuff going on off the field Friday night.
Carl Albert in Dell City is our number 2 game as Carl Albert looks to extend their winning streak to 38 consecutive victories, and standing in the way is longtime rival Dell City. These two teams do not like each other. We caught up with Carl Albert head coach Mike Corley talking about the matchup with the rival Eagles.
Big ball game. Coach Dunn's just done a great job over there, turning the corner and getting those guys to play like he wants them to play. And they're a really, really, really good football team. Like you said, their defense is strong. We rushed for 5 yards last year against them. We got to do better. And most of those guys are back. They're interior guys, and their linebackers are really good players. So it's a challenge. We've been preaching to our kids it's going to be a physical game, and we got to be ready when they come into town and come across town here and play tomorrow night for sure. Great atmosphere, really excited for Coach Rose, naming the stadium after him. Still going to call it Jim Harris Field, but Gary Rose Stadium. And, for a guy that spent, all those years at Dell City and as an assistant coach and then come over here and be the head coach for 22 years. I was over there 21 years. So just don't see that very often, in today's world where a guy spent his whole career in one community, and gave so much to the community and did such a great job. So that's going to add to the excitement, I think, tomorrow night.
The Vian Wolverines have one of the best defenses in the state of Oklahoma regardless of class. However, they have a huge matchup on Friday night as they face one of the top offenses regardless of class in Lincoln Christian. We caught up with Vian head coach Gary Willis to talk about the challenges that his team faces going into this clash with Lincoln.
Yeah, Lincoln's a first-class organization, from top to bottom. Played those guys for years, and from the way they carry themselves, the way they operate on the football field, got nothing but respect for them. Good, obviously a real good football team. Looking at them offensively, they're as good as any team we've seen offensively in quite a while. So, and then that's not saying anything about their defense. Their defense is right there too, and good, tough football team. We're looking forward to the opportunity. Had a close game last year, and it's always a good one when you get to go play those guys and to show your weaknesses and what you need to work on, and it'll bring out the competition level on both sides. Ought to be great. So looking forward to it.
The Claremore Zebras were very excited after their victory over Bartlesville last week, and now they'll look to check off another 6A2 team as they play host to Sapulpa in a huge matchup between two teams ranked number 5 in our OKPreps rankings. We caught up with Claremore head coach Jarrett Hurt about the matchup with Sapulpa.
We know Sapulpa's a great football team. They're a 6A Division II playoff qualifier from last year, with the bulk of the team back, led by Big 12 TCU commit Elijah Williams. So we know we have a tall task ahead of us. They're well coached. Coach Borgstad and his staff do an excellent job. And we know we have a work cut out for us. We're going to play a lot better than we played last year. Last year really wasn't a game. They were ahead 27-0, and we scored late in the game to make it 27-7. So we hope to play them a lot tougher than we did last year. And we've had a great week of practice, so we'll see what that means for week 2.
Crossings Christian looks to bounce back after losing to Rejoice last week in a blowout, and we talked with their head coach Jonathan Keithley about bouncing back and putting the memories of last week away as they play host to a big-time team in Minco.
We really need a good start and a fast start. We I think the psyche of the team's a little fragile right now after what happened last week at Rejoice. I think we still have confidence, but I think a fast start will kind of get us back on track and get us in the right frame of mind. So that's something we've emphasized all week. We really did not have a fast start. We kind of just put ourselves behind the 8 ball last week, and then it just steamrolled from there. So that'll be a big key tomorrow night is playing well early, and then just managing the physicality of Minco, because they're just always big and strong and physical, and so that's the challenge that we face. But we're excited. I think the kids we want to get the bad taste out of their mouth from last week. So the best way to do that is to go out and play well.
And our final guest is Lawton head coach Ryan Breeze, as they go into a huge clash with rival Lawton MacArthur, as these two teams both have not only playoff aspirations, but aspirations to go a little bit further into the playoffs. But before they can focus on that, they focus on this rivalry clash, and we caught up with Coach Breeze to get his thoughts on the matchup with the Highlanders.
The quarterback's way good. Racer Felter can really play. He makes him go. Throws it well, runs extremely well. We're going to have to corral him, get him on the ground, not allow him to beat us. He can beat you both through the air and with his feet. So he really makes him go. I mean, our kids are fired up. We have a city championship trophy that travels, and we've held that the last 2 years. We don't want it to leave our field house, and it's a big deal to us. Buy a city champ shirt, let the kids wear it year round. And so it's a big game. It'll be a good crowd. We fill up Cameron Stadium for the inner city games, so it'll be a lot of fun. Pretty electric.
My thanks goes out to all of those coaches who joined us here on the OKPreps Kickoff Show. Again, tune in every single week. Not only will you get analysis on the matchup, you'll get players to watch, which we're going into here momentarily, but you'll also hear from some of the great coaches around the state of Oklahoma. And then again, tune in every single weekend, if you haven't done so already, to our podcast channel, the OKPreps Podcast. Just search that on iTunes, subscribe, and you'll get all of our great podcast content, including this show. You also get the OKPreps Roundup, and we'll go further in depth with some of those coaches' interviews, talking about the games on Friday night themselves, how they win, who looked great. We have great interviews for you to check out. Just check that out on OKPreps Podcast right now on okpreps.com. All right, it's that time to look at 5 players to watch going into this week's games, and we start alphabetically as we do every single week, and we start at Union with their fantastic junior, AJ Green. He's a running back, he's a cornerback, but he's an absolute athlete for the Redskins, as every single time he steps on the field, he's one of the fastest players on the field. And Union, obviously, offensively, they want to get back to what they were able to do in week 0, as Green almost ran for 200 yards in his week 0 appearance against Mansfield Lake Ridge, but he's going up against a Jenks team that defensively is very hungry and very irritated after giving up 57 points to Bixby last week. But we saw what Bixby was able to do. That speed and space really hurt the Trojans. AJ Green, if he gets into the open field, we might see a performance much like week 0, as he had a great game against Mansfield Lake Ridge. He'll look to do so and kind of etch his name into the lore in this Jenks Union rivalry as a big-time performer in the Backyard Bowl. Our next player to watch is a guy who we've already mentioned on this list already this season, but he's having a great year, and we have to mention him again. Lincoln Christian quarterback Chayse Ricky. A great senior season so far. We expected nothing less coming into his senior year. He was great as a sophomore. He was even better and more efficient as a junior. And so far this year as a senior, he's been flat out dominant. And now what's going to happen as he goes against one of the best defenses in the state, going up against Vian? Ricky, he's made quick work of his opponents so far, but I think he might have to play all 4 quarters this week as he takes on a Vian team, which I've made no secret about how I feel about this defense. I think it's one of the best in the state, regardless of class, but he's definitely a player to watch. He's going to be a big reason for the result in this game with Lincoln Christian and Vian, who ends up winning the game. If Ricky has another big-time performance, Lincoln Christian is probably going to be on their way to a big-time win over a really good Vian squad. Another player to watch, we stay in the rivalry games as Carl Albert taking on Dell City. Carl Albert's junior running back Javion Hunt. He's been waiting for his time, and he actually got plenty of playing time in their overtime victory over Dell City last year against the Eagles. Javion Hunt had a good game against Dell City a season ago. He's looking forward to taking on his rival Eagles once again, and Javion Hunt has been an explosive playmaker for Carl Albert, but they've had Dadrian Rabbit Taylor at running back the last couple of years, so we haven't been able to see what Hunt can fully do as the guy at the running back spot, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does against Dell City. He had a great game against the Eagles last year. Looking forward to seeing what he can do for an encore. Again, Carl Albert looking to extend their winning streak now to 38 consecutive games. Dell City has a really good defense as well, especially that front seven. They have some guys that are going to be playing Division I football. They're going to try to do everything they can to slow down Javion Hunt of Carl Albert. Another player to watch is Claremore's Quentin Skinner, whether he's lining up at wide receiver, lining up at defensive back, or wherever he is on the field. He is really, when you look at this Claremore-Sapulpa matchup, Sapulpa has one of the best players in the matchup with quarterback Eli Williams, who's one of the fastest in the state, and there's not a lot of guys that are as athletic as Eli, except for Claremore's Quentin Skinner. I think that Quentin, while he's not as built as Eli is, he's just as athletic, he's just as fast. And so Quentin Skinner, if he's able to have a big game offensively, defensively, slow down Eli Williams and the Sapulpa offense, and then make some plays offensively, Claremore may be in for a big-time performance, not only from him, but as a team trying to knock off the Sapulpa Chieftains. And then our final player to watch is a guy who had a great week last week, and he's going to try to keep it rolling this week. Tuttle running back Tristan Truelove, as the Tigers have a huge test coming up on Friday night as they welcome in Plainview to Tuttle, Oklahoma. Tristan Truelove had a phenomenal game. I mentioned it earlier in our breakdown of the matchup itself. Tristan had 38 carries in the victory last week against Kingfisher. So look, if he has that type of workload again, expect Tuttle to be in a good position to win the football game, because they absolutely dominated Kingfisher. And if Truelove has that type of production again, whether it's 38 carries, he doesn't have to run for 275 yards or whatever he ended up with last week. But if they just control the ball and keep Plainview's offense off the field, they'll be in for some success on Friday night trying to get a big win over a really good Class 3A team. All right, as we move on here in the OKPreps Kickoff Show, those are 5 players to watch. Again, you can check us out every single week, and we put out that portion of the show individually as well, so you can check that out, the highlights of all 5 players. Great guys, great players, great athletes, and we're looking forward to seeing what they do on Friday night. Let's give you 3 teams on the rise, 3 teams that right now, as it stands, they're on the outside looking in on the OKPreps rankings in their respective classes. But I like what I've seen from them so far, and they could end up being on the rise, and in a week or two end up being in the top 10. And we start in 6A Division II with Deer Creek. They're 1-0 on the season. They beat Southmore last week 45-14. They have a huge test on Friday night. Is this team, and now they take on 6A1 number 5 Norman. They play host to the Norman Tigers, who I think is one of the better teams in 6A1. Obviously, they're still on the outside looking in when it comes to the Big Four, Broken Arrow, OWOSSO, Jenks, Union. But I think that Norman could end up beating one of those teams in 6A1 and be a real thorn in the side of some of those Tulsa schools. Now they come to town for Deer Creek, a huge test for the Antlers. Are they a real playoff team? This is a good opportunity for them. If they're able to win the game, huge upset. Deer Creek, without a doubt, deserves to be ranked. Even if they lose, if they don't get blown out, if they're in the game for all 48 minutes, I'm going to be impressed, because Norman is talented. Norman is very good. They had some problems with Norman North last week, so maybe there's an opportunity there for Deer Creek. I think regardless of what happens on Friday, Deer Creek barring an absolute blowout where they just don't show up, I think the Antlers are on the rise in 6A too. Let's go down to Class 4A for our next one, as Elgin coming in at 1-0. They beat Blanchard, who was ranked in our 4A top 10. Elgin winning that one 35-20, and they host Duncan on Friday. And a lot of people around the state, when it comes to media members, really like Duncan in Class 5A. If you look at some of the other rankings that are out there, a lot of them have Duncan in their top 10. So a big opportunity for Elgin as they're playing a team in a higher class that is highly respected around the state of Oklahoma. Big opportunity to get another win under their belt. They were impressive last week against Blanchard. Let's see what they can do this week as they welcome in Duncan. Our final team on the rise, we go to Class 3A and go to Shakota, a team that's 1-0. They beat Keys last week 41-14, and they host Hilldale. Kind of similar situation, Hilldale and Duncan, as Hilldale's in Class 4A. If you look at some of the other rankings that are out there, they're a team that's consistently ranked in the top 10. I like Hilldale. I think that they're a really quality football team. They're another team on the rise as well, so you can really make the case for both of these teams to be on the rise. Shakota, big opportunity against Hilldale. They have a great athlete in Jacob Barrett. Hilldale has a really good young quarterback who had a great game last week as well. So it's going to be a good matchup. Regardless of who wins, both of those teams, Hilldale and Shakota, little bonus team on the rise for you there with the fourth one with Hilldale. But it's going to be a good matchup regardless. I told you, week 2, there's great matchups all across the state regardless of if they're in the top 10 or not. Let's move on and to our next segment and answer some of your questions. Again, you can send us your questions on Twitter, on Facebook. Ask me in person. I don't care. You see me on the sidelines on a Friday night, ask me in person. We'll answer it right here on the OKPreps Kickoff Show. And we start with our first question. It comes to us from Twitter. Who is the top, we're talking recruiting here, who's the top uncommitted player in the state of Oklahoma for the 2020 class? I'm going to go with OWOSSO running back Isaiah Jacobs. I think that there's a lot of good players that are still on the board that have yet to make their decision. But then there's a lot of players that are committed, that are really talented. So when you look at those 2020 rankings, the majority of those top guys in the top 10, top 15, top 20 are already committed. But one guy who has not committed yet is OWOSSO running back Isaiah Jacobs. He's had a great start to his senior season. He's finally back at 100% healthy. He was snake bit all last year as a junior. And I think that Isaiah Jacobs, without a doubt, he has offers from all over the country. Michigan, one of the top programs, is recruiting him as well. Isaiah Jacobs, definitely the top uncommitted player in the state of Oklahoma. This question comes to us via Facebook. What are your thoughts on Edison, Lyman, Witt, Porkchop, Aslan? Sorry if I pronounced that last name incorrectly. Initial thoughts are great football player, great wrestler as well, as was a state qualifier, I believe, on the wrestling mat for Edison. What is he going to be in the future as far as collegiately? Will he play football? Will he play? Will he wrestle at the next level? I think that there are opportunities for him. And of course, when you're on that offensive line at Edison and you're blocking for a guy that's getting so much exposure, so many looks at with Savion Morrison, those linemen are going to pay off. Or be able to benefit from all that look, all that exposure. Obviously, he's opening the lanes for Savion to run through. And while Edison got off to a slow start last week against Sapulpa, I've made no secret about what I think of the Eagles this year. I think that they're a really good football team that could end up going far into the playoffs. Our final question, we mentioned weather earlier, and our final question is, will weather impact any games this week? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that Thursday you might see some games be a little impacted, but I think, and look, I'm putting my meteorologist hat on, and I definitely don't suggest doing so, as those guys definitely know a lot more than we do. But when I look at the weather forecast and talking with a couple of guys, I think that the majority of the bad weather is going to be late Thursday night into Friday morning and kind of cool off around, the Friday early mid-afternoon. So I think all the bad weather is going to be gone by the time things kick off on Friday. But really the answer is I have no idea, because this is Oklahoma and anything can happen when it comes to the weather. The second that you think you have it figured out, you're absolutely wrong. All right, let's wrap things up and make some picks as we do each and every single week. We wrap things up. Let's throw the top 10 graphic back on the screen and look at these top 10 games. Let's make some picks and pick some winners in these matchups. Number one, OWOSSO taking on Broken Arrow. I'm going with the road team. I think that it's going to be a great game. I think that OWOSSO ends up winning a very close matchup. It's high scoring. I think that we're going to see points here, but I like OWOSSO very close to pull off a huge win on the road against Broken Arrow. But really, this matchup is a coin flip either way between BA and OWOSSO. Carl Albert taking on Dell City. I'm going with the Titans to extend their winning streak up to 38 consecutive victories. I think the Titans, I don't think it goes into overtime. I think Carl Albert ends up pulling away. I really like Dell City. I like their defense. I think that they're going to be able to play with Carl Albert for about 3 quarters, but I think the Titans are too talented on both sides of the ball. I think that Carl Albert ends up pulling away in the fourth and winning comfortably. Lincoln Christian taking on Vian. I think that Lincoln Christian is too much for the Wolverines. Lincoln, as much as we talk about their offense, their defense is great. They held Jones to 14 points last week. Jones has a really good offense, and they were shut down by Lincoln last week. So as much as we talk about Chayse, Ricky, and this Lincoln Christian offense, their defense is outstanding. So I think that Lincoln has a really complete team in Class 3A. I don't know about Vian's offense. They only put up 14 points last week. I know that's a good Eufaula team that they beat, and I know it was their first time out. But you're going to have to score points. You're going to have to score points to beat Lincoln Christian. I think that Lincoln does end up scoring more than the 21 that they scored last year, just because I like this offense a whole lot. But I don't think it's going to be much more than that 21. But I think that Lincoln Christian defensively does what they need to do to shut down Vian and win a big-time ball game there in Tulsa. Our number 4 game, you have Tuttle taking on Plainview. I like Tuttle to win this one close. I think that they're going to try to stick to what worked last week against Kingfisher. They're going to want to run the ball, and I think they're going to be able to keep that Plainview offense off the field. I think Plainview scores, and I think they keep this game close throughout, but I think Tuttle ends up getting the win in that one. Our number 5 matchup, I wish I had a coin here on the set to pick Bishop Kelly and Bishop McGinnis, because I have no idea. And it's like the weather. Once you think you have it figured out, you don't when it comes to Kelly and McGinnis. I think I picked Kelly in the regular season last year. I got it wrong. I think I picked McGinnis in the playoffs last year. I got it wrong. So I'm going with Kelly. For whatever it's worth, I think that Bishop Kelly goes on the road. You never know if you think that Bishop McGinnis is the better team and they're probably the healthier team. I'm going to go the opposite, and I'm going to take Bishop Kelly. But again, it's a coin flip when these two teams take the field. It's going to be a great game regardless. The same can kind of be said about Jenks and Union in our next matchup. I'm going to go with Union. I think that Union bounces back big. I think Jenks has some issues that they need to work on and fix offensively, defensively. I think that Union, the panic button doesn't need to be hit with them right now. I think that they have some things that they can rely on, especially this week against Jenks, especially that offense. If they can bounce back after being shut out, I think Union bounces back big this time. Sapulpa taking on Claremore. I'm going with Sapulpa on the road. Big win for them. I think that it's going to be close for all 4 quarters as well. Heritage Hall taking on Clinton. We mentioned it earlier. Is Clinton back? Yes, but I don't think they win. I think that Clinton is very good this year, but I think Heritage Hall defensively is going to be too much. Heritage Hall rolls, and they win by at least double digits. Minco, I know that they want to make a statement this week against Crossings Christian after losing in overtime to Crossings last year. I'm going with Minco to get the win there. And then finally, Lawton and Lawton Mac. It's kind of similar to a lot of these games. It's a coin flip, but I like Lawton and MacArthur. I think that it's going to be close throughout, and I think kind of similar to some of these games, I think it's going to be high scoring as well, with a lot of points being put up on the board by both teams. but I like Lawton Mac to get a big-time win on Friday night. All right, that does it for the OKPreps kickoff. Before we get out of here, we want to promote some content that you can look forward to. Coming up this weekend, we'll have highlights of all the action on Friday night. The games that we'll be at are featured games, including this Broken Arrow OWOSSO matchup. The Patriot Bowl will be there on Friday night. You can follow us on Twitter for live tweets during the game at OKPreps TV. And also we'll be at Lincoln Christian as they take on Vian. You can follow us on Twitter to get live tweets from that matchup as well. And then following the games, we'll have highlights, we'll have interviews, we'll have analysis of all the top matchups in the state of Oklahoma with our highlight package for those two games between OWOSSO and Broken Arrow, and then Lincoln Christian and Vian. So you can check out those highlights again on our YouTube channel. Another reason to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And then also coming up this weekend, we'll have our same content that we put out every single week. Our OKPreps rankings will put out a new top 10 for every single class going into the final week of non-district play, week 3 next week. It's the final week of non-district play across Oklahoma. We'll put out our rankings for each class. We'll put out our 5 candidates for the OKPreps Player of the Week, which, by the way, shout out this week, Tuttle running back Tristan Truelove. He won the fans' vote for Player of the Week, and Booker T. Washington quarterback Gentry Williams won the staff pick for OKPreps Player of the Week. This week we'll have 5 new candidates coming up on Sunday. And then finally, we'll have the OKPreps Roundup. If you haven't done so already, for those listening to this show, again, the OKPreps Kickoff is also available on podcast, but you can subscribe to our podcast page. Just search OKPreps Podcasts, and you'll get our OKPreps Roundup show. We didn't have one. I was a little under the weather over the weekend, so we didn't have one this last weekend, but we'll definitely have one, guarantee it, coming up on Sunday with analysis of all the top games, all the top primetime players, big-time performances. We'll break down all of it, and we'll also be joined by coaches from across the state of Oklahoma to get their thoughts on all the top matchups as well. And then join us right back here next week with the OKPreps Kickoff show leading up to kickoff of week 3. Again, the final week of non-district play across Oklahoma. My thanks again to all the coaches who joined us here. I'm your host, Michael Knight, and this has been another edition of the OKPreps Kickoff Show.